I'm Augusta Beaumont, 78, a woman and my own sister publicly humiliated my grandchildren, calling them parasites in front of our entire family. There are moments in life that slice through time, leaving a clean, deep wound that never quite heals over. For me, that moment came on a sweltering 4th of July afternoon under the cathedral ceilings of my sister's palatial home. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and grilled steak, but all I could smell was the bitter smoke of burning bridges. The sound that will forever be etched into my memory is not the pop of fireworks, but the sharp, cruel crack of my sister Patricia's voice as she spat the word parasites at my grandbabies, my son's children, my blood. My name is Augusta Beaumont. I have lived 78 years on this earth. I have buried a husband, raised a son, and welcomed two grandchildren into a world I tried to make safe and kind for them. I thought I understood the complexities of the human heart, especially the tangled roots of family. I thought wrong. Family, I've learned, can be the softest place to land or the highest place to fall from. My fall was a long one. To understand the poison of that day, you have to understand the soil it grew in. Patricia is 4 years my junior, but she has spent her entire life trying to prove she was somehow older, wiser, and most importantly, better. When we were girls, our mother used to say I was born with a gentle heart and Patricia was born with a grasping hand. I didn't see it as malice back then. I saw it as ambition, a fire in her belly that I, in my quiet way, admired. It was the same fire that propelled her to marry Robert Sterling, a man whose wallet was as thick as his sense of superiority. They climbed the social ladder with a ruthless efficiency, leaving behind anyone who couldn't help them get to the next rung, including, more often than not, their own family. I remember one Christmas when my son Michael was just a boy. I had saved for months to buy him a beautiful fire-red bicycle. It was his pride and joy. We went to our parents' house for Christmas dinner and Patricia was there, childless then but already practicing her role as the grand dame. She took one look at Michael's beaming face and the shiny bike and scoffed. "Augusta, really?" she'd said, loud enough for our mother to hear. "Red is so common." I've already arranged for a trust fund for my future children, much more sensible than toys. She hadn't been trying to be sensible, she had been trying to shrink my gift to make my son's joy seem small and cheap. I saw the flicker of confusion on Michael's face, the first seed of doubt that his mother's love might not measure up in his aunt's world. That was Patricia's way. She didn't just want to have more, she needed you to feel you had less. Years later, when our own dear mother was on her deathbed, the difference between us was laid bare for all to see. I spent my days at Mama's side, holding her hand, reading her the Psalms, moistening her lips with a damp cloth. I absorbed her last whispers, her final, fleeting memories. Patricia would sweep in for an hour each afternoon, not dressed for a sick room, but for a board meeting. She discussed the funeral arrangements in a brisk, efficient tone, not with me, but with the hospice nurse. She was more concerned with the brand of lilies for the casket and whether the pastor's eulogy would be sufficiently dignified than she was with the fading light in our mother's eyes. One afternoon, Mama was having a difficult time, her breathing shallow. I was humming an old hymn to soothe her, my tears falling silently onto the quilt. Patricia walked in, took one look at me and said, "Honestly, Augusta, try to hold it together, you're upsetting her." She wasn't worried about Mama's peace. She was irritated by the raw, untidy display of my grief. It offended her sense of order. But the most consistent, painful reminders of the chasm between our worlds came in the form of birthday and Christmas gifts for the children. Patricia and Robert had no children of their own, a source of sorrow I wouldn't wish on anyone. But instead of pouring her maternal instincts into her only nephew and his children, she used them as props in her theater of wealth. For their birthdays, my grandchildren, Maya and Leo, would receive a crisp $50 bill in a generic card from Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert. It was a transaction, not a gift. It was the kind of tip you'd leave for a valet. Meanwhile, we'd hear through the family grapevine about the all-expenses-paid trip to Paris she'd gifted a distant cousin of Robert's, or the designer watch she'd bought for a business associate's son. My son Michael, bless his heart, never complained. He is a good man, a hardworking man who took over his father's carpentry business and made an honest, if modest, living. He saw the slights, of course he did, but he was a peacemaker just like his father. "It's due. Send her way, Mama," he'd say with a sigh. "It's not worth the trouble." So for years, I bit my tongue. For Michael, for my grandchildren, I smoothed over the hurt. I made excuses. I showed up to the family gatherings that felt more like showcases for Patricia's latest acquisitions. I smiled, I played the part of the happy, simple older sister, and I let the poison build drop by painful drop. Until the 4th of July when the dam finally broke and drowned us all. The invitation, as always, arrived not by phone call or simple text, but as a thick, cream-colored card in the mail. The lettering was embossed in gold script. You are cordially invited to the annual Sterling Independence Day celebration. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. My heart sank the moment I saw it. Another year of walking on eggshells in a house that felt like a museum, where the furniture was worth more than my car and the smiles were just as polished and just as cold. Do we really have to go, Michael? I asked my son over the phone, the heavy card lying on my kitchen table like a threat. I heard him sigh on the other end, a sound I knew all too well. It was the sigh of a man caught between his mother's comfort and his aunt's expectations. Mama, you know how she gets. If we don't show up, it'll be a whole thing. She'll tell everyone we're antisocial, that we think we're too good for her. It's easier to just go, eat a burger, and leave. It's never that easy, son, I said softly. It's a 4-hour performance. I know, he conceded, but the kids, they like the pool, and the fireworks are always good. He was right in a way. Maya and Leo at 16 and 14 were old enough to sense the tension, but young enough to be dazzled by the sheer spectacle of it all. Patricia's home wasn't just a house, it was an estate. It sat on 5 acres of manicured lawn that rolled down to a shimmering lake. There was a pool the size of a small pond, a tennis court, and gardens that looked like they'd been plucked from a magazine cover. To my grandchildren, who lived in a cozy 3-bedroom house on a quiet suburban street, it was like visiting another planet. I couldn't blame them for being intrigued, but I knew the price of admission was our dignity. The day of the party, I dressed in my Sunday best, a simple but elegant lavender dress. Michael picked me up with Maya and Leo in the back seat, their faces bright with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Maya had on a new sundress and Leo wore a crisp polo shirt. They looked beautiful, my treasures. Now you two remember the rules, Michael said, looking at them in the rearview mirror as we turned onto the long, winding driveway that led to Patricia's house. Don't run, don't touch anything that looks expensive, and if Aunt Patricia offers you something, you say yes, please, and thank you, ma'am. My heart ached hearing him say it. He was teaching his children how to behave not in a home, but in a gallery, how to make themselves small and unobtrusive so as not to offend the curator. The moment we stepped out of Michael's sensible sedan, the difference in our worlds was jarring. Sleek foreign cars, Mercedes, BMWs, a cherry red Porsche were lined up like jewels on the crushed stone driveway. The air hummed with the polite laughter of Patricia's friends, people whose names I could never remember, with faces that seemed stretched tight from either stress or surgery. Patricia greeted us at the door, a vision in white linen. She kissed the air beside my cheek. Augusta, you made it, and Michael, so good of you to come. Her eyes swept over my grandchildren, and a thin, tight smile touched her lips. Maya, Leo, my, how you've grown. It was a statement of fact, devoid of any warmth. She ushered us through the house toward the sprawling back patio. Everything was perfect. White tablecloths, floral centerpieces, a jazz trio playing softly in the corner. It was a production, and we were the country cousins, brought in to make the other guests feel more secure in their own importance. Robert, my brother-in-law, gave us a cursory nod from across the lawn where he was holding court by the massive stainless steel grill, a cigarillo clenched in his teeth. We found a small table near the edge of the patio, a little out of the main flow of traffic. It was our usual spot, the unofficial Beaumont family outpost. Michael went to get us plates of food, a dutiful son trying to make the best of it. I watched my grandchildren. Leo's eyes were wide, fixed on the sparkling blue water of the pool. Maya was more reserved, her posture stiff, her hands clasped in her lap. She was old enough to feel the chill in the air, to understand that we were tolerated, not welcomed. I tried to make small talk with a few familiar faces, cousins and old family friends who, like me, seemed to orbit Patricia's blazing sun at a safe distance. The conversation was always the same, strained complim. And it's about the house, the food, the weather. No one ever talked about anything real. Here in this gilded cage, real feelings were as unwelcome as a stain on the carpet. For 2 hours, we survived. We ate, we smiled, we nodded. Michael even managed to get roped into a conversation with Robert about the stock market, looking utterly lost but trying his best. The children stayed close, observing the unspoken rule to be seen and not heard. I was beginning to think we might actually escape unscathed. I was counting the minutes until we could politely say our goodbyes. But the universe, it seems, had other plans. The catalyst for the catastrophe was something so small, so innocent, it was almost comical. It was a glass of lemonade. My grandson Leo, ever the polite boy Michael had raised him to be, had been carefully nursing the same drink for over an hour. He was standing near the edge of the patio, watching some of the other younger children splash in the pool, a wistful look on his face. I was about to suggest he go join them when one of Robert's business partners, a loud, beefy man with a booming laugh, slapped him on the back as he passed by. "Having a good time, son?" he bellowed. The gesture was meant to be friendly, I suppose, but it was too forceful for a boy of 14. Leo stumbled forward, his arm jerking, and the glass of lemonade flew from his hand. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the arc of the yellow liquid, the glint of the sun on the glass as it tumbled through the air. It didn't land on the stone patio. It landed on a pristine, cream-colored armchair that sat near the French doors. A piece of furniture Patricia had proudly announced just an hour earlier had been imported from Italy and cost more than my first car. The lemonade spread across the fabric, a dark, ugly stain on the perfect cream. For a single horrifying second, there was absolute silence. The jazz trio faltered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every eye on that patio swiveled first to the stained chair and then to my grandson. Leo stood frozen, his face a mask of pure terror. His skin seemed to pale and his eyes, wide with shock, were fixed on the damage. I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to." Before I or Michael could even move, Patricia was there. She didn't walk, she materialized, her face a thundercloud of fury. She didn't look at the chair. She looked straight past it, her eyes locking onto my son Michael, who was already rushing toward Leo. "Michael," she said, her voice low and venomous, "control your children." Michael put a protective arm around Leo's shoulders. "Patty, it was an accident. The man bumped into him. We are so sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning, whatever it costs." "Pay for it?" Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was the sound of breaking glass. "You can't afford to breathe the same air as that chair, Michael, let alone clean it." The cruelty of that statement hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could see my son flinch as if he'd been struck. The other guests were watching now, a captive audience to our family's vivisection. I stood up, my legs trembling, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Patricia, that is enough," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in decades. "He is a child. It was an accident." Patricia finally turned her fiery gaze on me, and what I saw in her eyes was not just anger. It was years of resentment, of jealousy, of a deep, festering bitterness that I had foolishly mistaken for mere ambition. "Enough," she screeched, her voice rising in pitch, all pretense of polite society stripped away. "I will tell you what is enough, Augusta. I am sick of it. I am sick of opening my home, my beautiful home, to you people year after year. I am sick of your son with his dusty work clothes and his long-suffering face, and I am sick of his children who come here to devour my food and gawk at my things like they're at a theme park." She took a step closer, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger not at Leo, but at both him and Maya, who was now hiding behind her father, tears streaming down her face. And then she said the words that shattered everything. "I work my entire life for this. Robert and I have sacrificed for this, and I will not have it ruined by parasites. Get them out of here. Get these parasites out of my house." Parasites." The word echoed in the sudden, profound silence. It was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Leo, his face crumpled in shame and disbelief. I looked at Maya, sobbing into her father's shirt. I looked at Michael, whose expression was one of such profound, hollowed-out pain that it nearly brought me to my knees. He looked like that little boy with the red bicycle all over again, being told that his joy was cheap and common. No one moved, no one spoke. The jazz trio looked at their shoes, Robert's friends. Suddenly found the pattern on their plates fascinating. In that moment, they were all complicit, their silence a ringing endorsement of Patricia's cruelty. I walked forward until I was standing directly in front of my sister. My body was shaking, but my voice, when it came out, was steady. It was a cold, quiet whisper that cut through the silence more effectively than any shout. "You will regret this, Patricia," I said. "You will regret this for the rest of your days." Then I turned my back on her. I took Maya's hand in one of mine and Leo's in the other. "Come, babies," I said softly, "we're going home." Michael, his face a stony mask of grief, followed us. We walked, heads held high, right through the middle of the stunned crowd. We didn't run, we walked. A slow, dignified retreat from a battlefield we never should have been on, and with every step the word echoed in my head: parasites, parasites, parasites. The walk from the patio to Michael's car felt like a mile. Every head turned to watch us, a silent, staring jury. I could feel their pity, their morbid curiosity, their relief that it wasn't them. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, focusing on the familiar shape of Michael's car, a safe harbor in a hostile sea. My grandchildren's hands were cold and clammy in mine. We climbed into the car and Michael pulled away from the curb without a backward glance. The silence inside that car was louder than any argument. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame and hurt. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my grandchildren. Maya was pressed against the window, her silent tears tracing paths down her dusty cheeks. Leo was staring straight ahead, his expression blank, his body rigid with the effort of not crying. He was trying to be strong, my brave boy, but I could see the tremor in his hands. Michael gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He drove with a fierce, controlled concentration, his eyes fixed on the road as if it were the only thing holding his world together. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell them it wasn't their fault, that their aunt was a cruel, unhappy woman. I wanted to wrap them all in my arms and absorb their pain into myself. But the words were stuck in my throat, choked by my own rage and grief. What could I possibly say that would erase that word, parasites? It was a brand seared onto their young hearts. When we finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the lawn. No one moved to get out of the car. We just sat there, suspended in our shared misery. Finally, Michael turned off the engine and broke the silence. His voice was a raw, broken whisper. "I'm sorry, Mama." "Don't you dare," I said, turning to him, my voice fierce. "Don't you dare apologize for her. This is not on you, this is on her." "I should have known," he said, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. "I should never have taken them there. I kept telling myself it was about family, about keeping the peace. But what kind of peace is this? I put them in the line of fire, my own kids." Tears finally welled in his eyes, the tears of a father who felt he had failed to protect his young. Seeing my strong, capable son so utterly defeated broke something inside me. This was the true damage Patricia had wrought. She hadn't just stained a chair, she had stained my son's spirit. The days that followed were a blur of quiet sorrow. The phone rang constantly with calls from cousins and family members who had been at the party. Some called to offer sympathy, their voices hushed and conspiratorial. "I can't believe she said that, Augusta. She's gone too far this time." Others called to gently scold. "You know how Patricia is. Maybe you should just call her and smooth things over." Smooth things over? They wanted me to sweep shattered glass under the rug and pretend no one was bleeding. I let the answering machine take the calls. I couldn't speak to any of them. Patricia never called, neither did Robert. Their silence was its own statement, a confirmation that they felt no remorse. In their world, they were the victims, their Italian chair the only casualty. The real casualties were in my house. Michael stopped by every day after work, his face etched with a permanent weariness. But the change in my grandchildren was what truly tore me apart. Maya, my vibrant, talkative granddaughter, became quiet and withdrawn. She spent hours in her room, and when I tried to talk to her, she would just shrug and say, "I'm fine," in a voice that was anything but. Leo's reaction was different. His shame curdled into a quiet, simmering anger. He who had always been so gentle and easygoing became sullen and quick to argue. He quit the junior baseball team, saying it was stupid. He got into a fight at school. When the principal called, Michael and I went to the school Tojith. The principal explained that Leo had pushed a boy who had teased him about his cheap sneakers. Cheap. Another word designed to measure a person's worth by what they owned. I saw Patricia's poison at work, spreading through my family, corrupting my grandson's gentle soul. I felt helpless. I would sit in my armchair, the one my late husband David had always favored, and I would just rock back and forth, praying for guidance. Grief was a fog in my mind. I replayed the scene at the party over and over, my own words echoing in my ears. You will regret this, Patricia. They felt so empty now. What good was her regret if my family was already broken? One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the party, I was looking through an old photo album. I came across a picture of me and Patricia as little girls standing beside our father. We were wearing matching dresses Mama had sewn, holding hands, squinting into the sun. For a moment, I felt a pang of sorrow for that little girl, the one with the grasping hand who had grown into a woman with a closed fist and a hollow heart. What had happened to her? What had happened to us? But as I looked at the photo, my sorrow began to burn away, leaving something else in its place. It was a slow, rising heat in my chest. It wasn't the hot, helpless rage of that day. This was different. It was cold. It was hard. It was resolve. I thought of my late husband. David was a man of immense dignity. He never had much money, but he had a wealth of self-respect. Never let anyone steal your good name, Augusta, he used to tell me. It's the only thing you truly own. Patricia hadn't just insulted my grandchildren. She had tried to steal their good name. She had tried to redefine them, to label them as worthless, and I had let her. I had walked away. I had hidden in my grief. No more. The fog in my mind cleared. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones what I had to do. I would not let my sister's venom be the final word on the legacy of the Beaumont family. I closed the photo album, stood up from my chair, and walked to the telephone. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed the number of the only man I knew who valued integrity as much as David had. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. Ballard. No hello, no nonsense. That was George Ballard. He had been my husband David's best friend since they were boys, and he'd been our family's lawyer for 40 years before he retired. George was 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for being as unshakable as an old oak tree. If David was the heart of our family's honor, George was its legal spine. And George, it's Augusta Beaumont, I said. There was a slight pause, and then the gruffness in his voice softened. Augusta, it's good to hear your voice. It's been too long. Is everything all right? The simple, kind question almost broke me. No, George, I said, my voice thick with emotion. No, it's not all right at all. And then it all came pouring out. I told him everything. The years of slights, the tension, the gilded cage of Patricia's home. I told him about the party, the spilled lemonade, and the vicious, ugly words she had used. As I spoke, I could picture him on the other end, sitting in his worn leather chair, his brow furrowed, listening without interruption. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. That woman, he finally said, his voice a low rumble of indignation. She always did think she was royalty. I'm sorry, Augusta. I'm truly sorry that you and those children had to endure that. Sorry isn't going to fix it, George, I said, a new strength in my voice. She wounded them. She wounded Michael. She thinks she can do it because she has money and we don't. She thinks her wealth makes her untouchable. I need to know if she's right. What are you asking me, Augusta? You're a lawyer, a retired one, I know, but you're the smartest man I know. Patricia and I, our parents left us something jointly. That old commercial property downtown, David and I never touched our half. We let Patricia manage it, said to just let the value grow. She sends me a check every year for my share of the rental income. It's not much, but it's something. For years, she's been telling me the area is depressed, that the tenants are barely hanging on. My heart was pounding now, the idea taking shape even as I spoke it. She lives in that palace, George. She and Robert throw parties that must cost a fortune. He does well, I know, but does he do that well? I need to know. I need you to look into it. I need to know if the books are balanced. George was silent again. I knew I was asking a lot. He was retired. This was family business, messy and unpleasant. Augusta, he said slowly, are you sure you want to open this door? Once you do, you can't close it. This could tear what's left of your family apart for good. What's left of it? I asked, my voice trembling. With a righteous anger. A sister who calls my grandchildren parasites, a son who feels like a failure, grandchildren who are learning to be ashamed of who they are. That's not a family, George. That's a hostage situation. She is holding us all hostage with her money and her power. I'm not looking for revenge. I am looking for the truth. The truth is the only thing that can set my family free. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant mind. I heard him let out a long, slow breath. Our parents left us a joint venture. He mimicked my words, tasting them. David always said Patricia was clever, but her greed would be her undoing one day. He paused. All right, Augusta, all right, I'll look into it. Bring me every piece of paper you have related to that property. The deed, the partnership agreement, the tax statements she's sent you over the years, everything. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, George, I whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said, his voice all business again. This might lead nowhere, but if your hunch is right, well, let's just say dignity is worth more than any Italian armchair. The next day, I spent hours in my attic digging through a dusty old trunk filled with my late husband's files. And there it was, a thick folder labeled Beaumont Properties. Inside were the original documents signed by my father in his looping, elegant script. There were years of statements from Patricia, simple one-page summaries showing meager rental incomes and high maintenance costs, resulting in the modest check she sent me each spring. It had never occurred to me to question them. She was my sister. I gathered every scrap of paper and drove to George's house, a modest but immaculate brick home on a quiet, tree-lined street. He greeted me at the door and led me to his study, a room that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. It was a room of quiet contemplation, a stark contrast to the loud, sterile opulence of Patricia's mansion. We sat at his large mahogany desk, and I laid the folder in front of him. He put on a pair of reading glasses and began to sift through the documents, his focus absolute. He read in silence for nearly an hour, occasionally making a note on a yellow legal pad. I just sat and watched, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. Finally, he looked up, his expression grim. Augusta, he said, tapping a finger on one of Patricia's statements from 5 years ago. This is interesting. She lists a major plumbing repair here for $10,000 and the year before a new roof for $15,000. And the property taxes she claims to have paid seem high, very high for that district. What does it mean? I asked, leaning forward. It could mean she's just a terrible businesswoman, he said, or it could mean she's been padding her expenses and underreporting the income for years. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. There's only one way to find out for sure. I'll need to go down to the county records office, see who the official tenants are and what the declared commercial rents are in that block. It'll take me a few days. As he looked me straight in the eye, are you ready for what I might find? I thought of Maya's quiet sadness and Leo's misplaced anger. I thought of the shame on my son's face. I straightened my back and met his gaze without flinching. I'm ready, George. The next few days were agonizing. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. I tried to keep busy, tending to my garden, baking cookies for the grandkids, but my mind was constantly circling back to George and the dusty files at the county records office. I didn't tell Michael what I was doing. I didn't want to give him a hope that might be false, a hope that might lead to even greater disappointment. This was my battle to fight. On Friday afternoon, George called. Augusta, can you come over to my office? He asked, using a word he hadn't used in years. His office was his study. The formality in his tone told me everything I needed to know. He had found something. When I arrived, the mahogany desk was covered in papers. My old files and new ones, copies of official-looking documents, spreadsheets filled with numbers, and a large zoning map of the downtown area. George looked tired, but his eyes had a sharp, focused glint. Sit down, Augusta, he said, gesturing to the chair. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. Your hunch wasn't just right, it was the tip of the iceberg. He turned a spreadsheet toward me. It had 3 columns. The first was labeled Income Reported by Patricia. The second was Actual Rent Roll County Records. The third was Difference. I stared at the numbers, and for a moment they didn't make sense. My mind couldn't process the sheer scale of the deception. The checks, Pa. Trisha had sent me for my half were for around $5,000 a year. According to the official records George had pulled, my half of the actual income after legitimate expenses and taxes should have been closer to $50,000 or $60,000 a year for the last 15 years. I don't understand, I whispered, though I understood perfectly. It's simple, old-fashioned fraud, Augusta, George said, his voice laced with cold anger. Your sister hasn't just been padding the expenses. She created a separate company, Sterling Management, to manage the property. She paid her own company an exorbitant management fee, she billed the partnership for repairs that never happened, and she leased the two largest storefronts to national chains for a premium, while telling you she was renting them to struggling local businesses for a pittance. He slid another document across the desk. It was a copy of a deed of sale. And this, he said, is the kicker. 3 years ago, she sold a small parcel of the land at the back of the property to a developer who was building a parking garage. She never told you. She forged your signature on the transfer document. The money, $250,000, went directly into the Sterling management account. I felt the room tilt. I put a hand on the desk to steady myself. $250,000. The parties, the cars, the vacations, the Italian armchair, it was all paid for with my money, my inheritance, my father's legacy. It wasn't just that she had cheated me. It was that she had done it while simultaneously looking down on me for my modest life. She had built her castle using the stones from my foundation and then shamed me for living in a cottage. The rage I felt was so pure, so absolute, it was almost clarifying, but beneath it was a profound, aching sadness. This wasn't a stranger who had swindled me. This was Patty, my little sister. What can I do? I asked, my voice trembling. Legally, George said, leaning back in his chair. We could destroy her. We have enough here for a civil suit that would bankrupt her and a criminal case for fraud and forgery that would likely send her to prison. We could take everything. The thought of Patricia, my sister, in a prison uniform made my stomach turn despite my anger. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted to. What did I want? I wanted to take back what she had stolen, not the money, the dignity. No, I said, shaking my head. No courts, no police. George raised an eyebrow. Augusta, she stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from you. She stole more than that, I corrected him. She tried to steal my family's self-respect, and that's what I want back. The money is just the tool to get it. I looked at George, my mind racing, a plan beginning to form from the ashes of my grief. I don't want to send her to jail. I want her to apologize. Apologize? He looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. You think a woman like that is capable of a sincere apology? She will be, I said, a cold certainty in my voice. She will apologize to my son, and she will apologize to my grandchildren in front of the family. She is going to look them in the eyes and tell them they are not parasites. She is going to tell them they are Beaumonts, and that name means something. And you, my old friend, are going to help me make sure she does. George stared at me for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile in days. Augusta Beaumont, he said with a low chuckle. Your husband always said you were the strongest person he ever knew. I'm beginning to think he was understating the case. All right, we'll do it your way. Let's draft an invitation, shall we? A family meeting. I have a feeling this is one party Patricia won't be enjoying. We didn't give her time to prepare. The very next morning, a Saturday, I called the key family members who had been at the party, my cousin Martha, my uncle William, and a few others who had witnessed the humiliation but had stayed silent. I didn't tell them why, I just said, there is an urgent family matter. Please be at George Ballard's office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. It concerns Augusta and Patricia. The gravity in my voice left no room for questions. Then I called Michael. Son, I need you and the children to come with me to a meeting this afternoon. I can't explain now, just trust me. To his credit, he asked no questions. The exhaustion in his voice was replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Okay, Mama, we'll be there. The last call was the hardest. I dialed Patricia's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and impatient. What is it, Augusta? Patricia, I said, my voice even and calm. There is a family meeting today at 2 o'clock at George Ballard's office. You and Robert need to be there. A meeting, what on earth for? I'm busy, I have plans. Cancel them, INT. Erupted, the steel in my voice surprising even myself. This is not a request. George has discovered some discrepancies with our parents' property. If you are not there, my next call will be to the district attorney's office. The silence on the other end was heavy and complete. I could almost hear the frantic calculations whirring in her mind. The bravado in her voice was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy fear. We'll be there, she whispered and hung up. At precisely 2 o'clock, we were all gathered in the conference room adjacent to George's study. It was a somber, wood-paneled room. I sat at the head of the long table with Michael, Maya, and Leo on one side of me and George on the other. My family members filled the other chairs, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Patricia and Robert were the last to arrive. They looked pale and drawn. Patricia's expensive silk blouse seemed to hang on her, and for the first time in her life, she looked her age. She avoided my eyes, her gaze darting around the room before settling on the thick file folder in front of George. George stood up. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he began, his voice commanding the room. We are here to address a grave injury that was done to this family, an injury of words and an injury of deeds. He didn't draw it out, he simply methodically laid out the truth. He spoke of the real estate partnership left in trust by my parents. He spoke of the years of doctored accounts, of the fraudulent expense reports, of the secret sale of land. With each sentence, Patricia seemed to shrink in her chair. Robert stared at the table, his face ashen. My cousins and uncle exchanged shocked glances, their mouths agape. When George finished, he slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Patricia. This is a summary of the funds that have been misappropriated from Augusta's share of the trust over the last 15 years, including the sale of the land. The total is just over $900,000. A collective gasp went through the room. My son Michael stared at the paper, then at his aunt, his expression unreadable. This document, George continued, his voice like granite, along with the evidence of forgery, is ready to be filed in both civil and criminal court on Monday morning. Augusta has the power to take your home, your cars, your reputation, and your freedom, Patricia. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Patricia finally looked up, her eyes swimming with panicked tears. She looked at me. Augusta, please, she whimpered. I can pay it back. I'll pay it all back. I looked at her, my sister, so diminished and pathetic. I felt no triumph, only a deep, profound pity. This was never about the money, Patricia, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. The money is gone, you spent it on things you thought would make you happy but only made you cruel. The money doesn't matter. I stood up and walked to where my grandchildren were sitting. I put my hands on their shoulders. What matters is this, what matters is them. You stood in your big, beautiful house and you called these children parasites. You shamed them. You shamed their father. You tried to make them feel worthless because they don't have what you have. I looked directly into her eyes. You owe them a debt far greater than money. You owe them their good name back, and you are going to pay it right here, right now. Tears were streaming down her face now, the messy, real tears of a person whose world has just crumbled. She looked from me to Michael, to Maya, and to Leo. Her gaze fell on my grandson Leo, the boy whose spilled lemonade had started it all. She pushed her chair back and stood up on trembling legs. She walked around the table until she was standing in front of my son and his children. She didn't look at Michael first. She looked at the kids. Maya, Leo, she began, her voice cracking. What I said, it was a monstrous thing to say, a wicked, horrible thing. It wasn't true. It came from a place of ugliness in me, not you. She finally raised her eyes to my son. Michael, she sobbed, you are a good man, a better man than your uncle, a better man than I could ever hope for. You raised beautiful, polite, wonderful children. They are not that word, they are Beaumonts. And I am so, so sorry. I am so ashamed. She completely broke down then, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. Robert, for the first time, moved. He went to her and put an arm around her, but she shrugged him off, her shame too great to be comforted. In that moment, she was no longer the queen in her castle. She was just a broken old woman who had lost her way. I looked at Michael. He had tears in his eyes, but he stood up and walked to his aunt. He put a hand on her arm. "It's all right, Aunt Patty," he said softly. "It's all right. And I knew we were going to be okay." Patricia did pay back a portion of the money, enough to set up substantial college funds for Maya and Leo, a symbolic act of restitution. We never took her to court. Her punishment was having to live with the truth, exposed to the family she had tried so hard to rule. Our relationship is not healed, and it may never be. Some wounds are too deep, but it is honest now, stripped of all pretense. I learned something powerful that summer. I learned that true wealth has nothing to do with the size of your house or the name on your clothes. It's measured in dignity. It's the inheritance of a good name passed down through generations. It's the quiet strength of a son who can forgive and the resilience of grandchildren who learn that a cruel word cannot define them. My family's foundation was shaken, but it did not break. We rebuilt it not with money, but with truth and forgiveness. And it is stronger now than it ever was before.